for a little bit because there's quite a bit more stuff that we're going to need to go over. So a lot of this might end up being a little bit confusing if you've never coded before, but it's really important to remember that you don't actually need to know everything that I'm doing because I'm going to actually be typing it out all for you. All I'm trying to do right now is expose you to as much as possible. So if something starts getting a little bit confusing, really like pay attention to it, rewatch this part of the video if you need to, or just copy exactly what I have and move on from there. I really don't want you to get discouraged if I go into something that's a little more advanced. So this time we're going to create an input. Our ID is going to be age, and our type is going to be text. Placeholder is going to be enter your age. We don't need a value because they're going to type it in themselves. Then we're going to have a button. Our ID. Then we're going to have a button. Our on click is going to say display age range. And then we're going to type display age range. Awesome. So now we're going to create another function called display age range. Then we're going to do the exact same thing we did with our name, but with our age. And we're going to say equals document.getElementById age dot value, because we want to get the value and not the input box itself. So now we have a pretty good idea of how this works, I think. So we have our age. So if I type in alert age, and then refresh our page, this is looking a little bit messed up. So we're just going to move this outside of our container for now. Cool. We're going to put a BR there. I know I said not to, but for the purpose of this tutorial, it's fine. Awesome. So now I'm going to enter my age. I'll say I am 15. I am not. And then 15. But we want to take it to the next step now. So one thing that we can do is add a string and a number. So a string is a line of text and a number is a number. So for example, to a computer, this is a string and it doesn't know what that is. It could be a sentence, right? Like, I am going to buy 2 chocolate bars. So the computer just sees a string of text. It has no idea that this 2 right here represents an actual number. So if we did that, for example, it would actually equal 22. And the reason why is because if you add a string and a number, it converts the number to text. So if we added 2 plus 2, it would be 4. But if we added 2 as text plus 2, it would then convert this to that and then add them as a string. So we can actually see this happen if we type console.log 2 plus 2, and then if we type in console.log 2 plus 2. And then if we refresh our page, go to our console, click display age, you'll see 4 and then 22. So I hope that kind of makes sense. So because of that, we can add a sentence and a number and it will work. So for example, in here, we can type in your age is space plus age. And then if we refresh the page, just type in 5, your age is 5. So we have just added a string and a number together, and that's great. We're going to take it a step further now, and what we want to do is display a message that says if you're over the age of 18, it'll say you're an adult. If you're over the age of 13, it'll say you're a teenager, and if you're less than 13, it'll say you're young. So we're going to make a new variable called message, and we are going to set it equal to an empty string because we don't actually know what they're going to type in, so we can't make the message right away. So we're going to do something called an if statement. We're going to type if age is greater than or equal to 18, message equals you are an adult. Then we're going to type in else if age is greater than or equal to 13, then message equals you are a teenager. Actually, I want to display that you can have as many else ifs as you want. So just to show that off, I'll have if age is greater than or equal to 5, then message equals you are young, else message equals you are really young. Okay, so let's kind of take a look at what we're doing here. So we have this if age is greater than or equal to 18. The reason why we have this greater than or equal to is because if we just had greater than, then this would only run if they were 19, right? Because it would say if age is greater than 18. But we want it to include 18, so we're going to type the equals. So this symbol means greater than, and this symbol means less than. So if age is greater than or equal to 18, we're going to say you are an adult. Else if, or otherwise, age is greater than or equal to 13, you are a teenager. And the reason why we did it this way is because code runs from top to bottom. So if the person's age is 20, it will never actually end up reaching these lines of code. It'll say if age is greater than or equal to 18, which it is, 20 is greater than 18, then set message to equal you are an adult, and then exit the rest of this code, don't run it, and jump right down to this line of code, which we're going to have message. Now you'll notice we have two else ifs and an else. So you can have as many else ifs for as many conditions as you want, but then else will always run if none of these other things run. So if age is not within any of these categories, else will run. So if we click save, then we refresh our page and we type in 5, it'll say you are young. And then if I type in 4, it'll say you are really young. If I type in 13, you are a teenager. If I type in 18, you are an adult. Now I could literally type in like as many numbers past here as I want, because it will always be greater than 18. And I could even type in like -10 if I wanted to, and it'll still say I'm young because it will still fall under this else. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. We're going to be doing more practical if-else statements in the future, but I just wanted to show this right now. Okay, so now that we did the if-else statements, we're going to move on to arrays. And I will explain that now. We're going to have another function called display class. So imagine you're in school. There's a lot of kids in your class with you. So if I typed in var name equal to Colin or whatever your name is, that's great and all, but what about the person sitting next to you? What do I want to call them? Do we want to go var name2 equals Tom, and then var name3 equals Jim? As you can see, we're going to have a very long list of variables at this point. So instead of doing that, we're going to create something called an array. And an array is just a type of variable, similar to how a string is a type of variable and a number is a type of variable. And all it is basically a list. So in order to create an array, you hit the key beside P that will give you this bracket, but don't hold shift. And now we have our array. But it only contains one value, and that's Colin. So we're going to create another value by hitting a comma. And then we're going to type in Tim. And then we're going to type in Jim. Very original. And we're going to change this to say var names. So now we have an array that's one variable. That's 3 names. So now if we create another button down here, on click equals display class, and then we type in display class, and then down here we can console.log names. If we refresh our page and we click display class, it will display all of our names. Now, what if you only wanted to get the first person's name, for example? Arrays are separated by numbers. So you can type in 0, for example. If we type in names 0, it will just give us Colin. And you might be wondering, why did I type in 0? And the reason why is because with most people, we start our first number at 1. So 1 is the first number, 2 is the second number, 3 is the third number, and so on. But computers are just a little bit different. The first number is actually 0. So it can be a little bit confusing, but if you want to access the first element in the array, you are accessing the 0 element according to a computer. So this array has 3 elements, 0, 1, and 2. So if we typed in 1, names 1, it would give us Tim. Awesome, but we want to display everybody's name in a list. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that in a loop. Now, this is quite complicated, so I'm mostly doing this for people that have maybe a little bit more coding experience. If you don't understand what's going on here, that's completely fine. You'll be able to follow all of it along later. But we're going to loop through each element in this array, and then we're going to display it. So we're going to do a for loop, and then we're just going to type in var index equal to 0, semicolon, while index is less than names.length, semicolon, index plus plus. Now that seems like a lot, but it's actually not that bad. Basically what this is saying is we're going to create a variable called index, and we're going to set it equal to 0. We are going to continue running this loop over and over again as long as index is less than names.length. Now we know right now names.length is 3. So as long as index is less than 3, it will continue to run this loop. Now every time we run this loop, we're going to add 1 to index. So I'm going to write that down in something called a comment. So if we go // we can type whatever we want in here, and it won't actually register it as code. So we create a new variable called index. We run the loop as long as index is less than the length of the names array. Every time we run the loop, add 1 to index. Great. So this is where it's probably already a little bit complicated, but basically all we have to do is type in console.log names, and in brackets, instead of typing in a number, we just put index. Now if we refresh our page, display class, it will display each one of our names on its own line. Remember, if you don't get this, that's completely okay. Just follow along. This is a little bit more advanced. So just to reiterate sort of what's going on here, we have our names array. And if we access the 0 element, it will give us Colin. If we access the 1 element, it will give us Tim. And if we access the second element, it will give us Jim. So for example, names 0 is Colin. We're going to just comment that out. Names 1 is Tim. I don't need these semicolons. And then names 2 is Jim. So when we run through this for loop, we're going to create a variable called index, set it equal to 0. While index is less than names.length, which is 3, add 1 to index. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to console.log names index. Now remember, index equals 0. So what we're actually doing is typing console.log names 0. That is what the computer understands index as, because we set it to 0. Then the loop runs out. So it goes back and redoes this code. It adds 1 index, and now index now is equal to 1. So at the start, index equals 0. So then it runs the loop. It says index now equals 1. And it actually goes from right to left on this part. So it says is 1 less than names.length, which is 3. Yes, 1 is less than 3. So then we're going to console.log names index. But remember, it's actually doing console.log names 1, because index now equals 1. Then it's going to do it again. It's going to say, okay, now we're done the loop. So add 1 to index. So now index equals 2. And we can type that here. Index now equals 2. Then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to console.log names index, which means we're console.logging names 2. And then finally, once this console.log is done, it's going to go back up to here, add 1 to index. Index now equals 3. So it's going to say, is index less than 3? No, index is not less than 3, so it's going to break out of the loop. And that is how we get that to happen. Now the very last thing I want to teach you before we start getting into actually making this website is objects, which is also sort of complicated, but basically a name isn't good enough. So what if I needed to know what your name was, but I also needed to know how much you weighed? This wouldn't cut it. And we wouldn't want to have a variable called weight that's equal to like, oh, Colin is 120 pounds, Tim is 110 pounds, and Jim is 140 pounds. Because by looking at it right now, it's like, oh, that seems easy to match up. But it would be really easy to get lost. So instead, we're going to create an object. We're just going to create a person object equal to, so these curly braces mean we're creating an object. So we're going to type in name, Colin, and then weight of 120. Okay, so now if we typed in console.log person.name, and then we just commented out everything else, if we refresh our page, it says Colin. And if we typed in person.weight, it says 120. So instead of doing this, we can have a variable called class is taken. So we'll have a variable called people, and then we'll have name colon comma weight colon 120, and then we can actually just put that right in place of the string, and then we can do the same thing for these other two. Tim 130, Jim 140. So now when we loop through people instead of names, we can do console.log, and then we can type in people index.name plus ways plus people index dot weight plus pounds. Okay, so if index was 0 right now, just hypothetical, we would be saying people 0, so that is the first element in the array, dot name, which is colon, so it would say colon ways people 0 dot weight, people 0 dot weight 120 pounds. So if we refresh, it'll display that for each one of these. Okay, so that is incredibly complicated. What's really cool here is you don't need to have memorized any of this. You don't need to completely be following along. I just want to give you a sort of representation of things I'm going to be doing in the future with code, so that even if you don't necessarily know entirely what it means, you'll at least recognize it a little bit. So the last thing that we're going to want to do is create a new file called intro.html. Then we're going to Control A, everything, and then Control X to cut it. Then go back to intro.html and Control V to paste it. Okay, so now our home.html will be blank, but you have this stuff for reference. Now we're going to start getting into it.